as it usually relates to a certain unintelligibility, because it refers to a specific language that is used by specific people, specific groups, and that can only be understood by insiders. So this is always the thing that people get critiqued for, or academics have to face critique, that they are unintelligible and that they're speaking language that is artificial. It's a slippery slope with jargon, because of course, if you use jargon, then you have the feeling that you belong to a discourse community or whatever you want to call it, or you just belong to a group of experts in your field. But obviously it also excludes a more general audience. So maybe academic writing as such is to be considered jargon, as it is more formal than other writing. And interesting enough, there's even online tools that make you simplify your language. So for example, there's simplish.org, where you can simplify your text. You can type in your text and then it gets simplified for you. I find that a very interesting tool. So some highly subjective suggestions in terms of discourse, in terms of how to be part of a community, or how to join the game or not join the game. Read and read and read and read in order to familiarize you with yourself, with the field that you're working in. But of course, don't overuse jargon just because you want to belong and just because you're lonely and you want to be part of the cool guys. Just because it sounds academic is not enough. It should be about content, obviously. So do not try to impress others too much. Do not fall prey to pressure of your academic peers. This is not to be underestimated. Not high school, but all similar. Always know what you're talking about. This should be evident, but it's not. So know your concepts and know how these concepts are used in your field. Discourse is a good example. Everyone uses it. No one explains it. No one defines it, or no one differentiates it. So don't be self-absorbed. Would also be a good suggestion, because you should think maybe, for whom are you writing? Whom are you addressing? In the case of a thesis, well, your audience is unfortunately rather limited in most cases, but ideally you will publish a book and then the audience is larger. And still, it's a slippery slope, but stick to your voice. Don't try to adapt too much to an imagined community, as Anderson said, or to an imagined readership that will love your book. Just stick to your voice and then the readers will find you, or not. But now something completely different. We're dealing with hierarchies now, or with stages. And these are not in linear or complete order, because it's like a chicken or egg situation always. First, you have the question, the problematic, and I will go into depth more later. That's a very overall question, a very overall problematic. That's the golden thread. From this, you develop a research topic. After that, you ideally build a tentative structure, which may include an outline or a proposal or an exposé or an extended table of contents and so on. Because before you start writing, it's highly recommended you create a tentative structure. I sometimes recommend an extended table of contents because that gives you the idea you have everything under control, at least somehow. And you can also write or draw an outline, maybe even make a time plan. And of course, if you're a PhD student, we already heard that you have to submit a thesis proposal before the beginning of the third year. And it also, of course, depends on your advisor. But usually, and as you can read in the outlines, in the guidelines, you will just give a brief outline of your topic and provide a very provisional approach to it, how you want to tackle this topic. What is important, you should really show that you have a broad understanding of the field that you're trying to explore, not master, but explore, and that you're able to construct a problematic or create a problematic that will then form the basis of a contribution to this field. Ideally, a contribution, because that's also quite important if you're doing a PhD. So you need to know what's happening in your field. And all this will inform and is informed by your research, by your literature search and research, which in turn is again informed by your guiding question, which then in turn is informed by the grasp that you have of your field. So for some, it's the hardest and the longest part, because for some, reading and research takes longer than actual writing, and it's entirely possible. But some are very organized. Some people are very organized, and they create a tentative timing or research schedule. We will maybe, if we have time, talk about this later. Then this is following by doing research, depending on your discipline, but it will be mostly a literature research. You look at the relevant bibliography material. Then the writing, the actual writing part, including revision and editing, which is not to be underestimated. It can take some time. Then conclusion, ideally, it's your contribution. And then you should also save some time for the submission and the defense. So to adhere to this hierarchical structure, how to begin? First, you should choose a very broad area or idea or field. You should choose something that is not utterly boring, that is not completely, how do you say it, out research, that not everyone has done research on already. At the same time, you should also not choose something that no previous research has been done, because you cannot really start from scratch. This is not within a thesis. So don't think too big. You should be realistic. You don't want to spend the rest of your life with one research question. And you may want to finish your degree eventually. So narrow it down as much as you can. Narrow it down even more. And from this, ideally, you identify and outline a clear problematic or objective. These are the central questions. What is your aim? What is your thesis? What is your question? What is your golden thread? And then you introduce your topic thoroughly. You mark or you make your guiding thread as clear as possible, because this guiding thread will be spread all over your text. What do you want to know? And this is a genuine question. Is there anything you really want to know? Otherwise, don't do it. Or what do you want to find out? Not a rhetorical question. Is there you want to know something? You want to find out something that you did not know before. And then you embed all this in a theoretical framework. You always have to make sure to underline the main theoretical underpinnings of your work. Then develop, define, and again, narrow your topic. It cannot be narrow enough. You have to differentiate your topic, which means you should limit your topic. The topic. So, think small. Do not attempt to explore or to explain or to say it all. That's a noble gesture, but no, don't do it in a thesis. You don't want to cover it all. You cannot cover it all. It will just be embarrassing. Think small. At the same time, Think big. This is important. You should expand your bubble. This is true for all areas of life, but especially here. You should really include different perspectives. You should add perspectives from thinkers you are not really fond of. You should really include frameworks that you don't understand, and you should include ideas that you don't understand or you don't want to use. You should really let yourself be carried away. Be as open as possible. This is probably the last time you can be as open. Let yourself be surprised. And then you can still confirm your worldview afterwards, but at least you tried. So don't try to change the world, at least not in your thesis or in your dissertation. Be critical rather than normative. Don't use one should or one has to. This is an imperative. This is really important. Don't be too normative. You really have to explicate the validity of your norms. You cannot just state something. A thesis or a dissertation is not the place to make normative assumptions. You can write this manifesto later on. Don't do it in your thesis. Include others also to back up your arguments, which is an elegant way of convincing people that you're right. Also pretend to not have any bias, which is impossible. We are all biased, but at least pretend. This has to do again with this being carried away. Write in an affirmative way. Don't be shy. You know, others should know and what you're talking about, and importantly, also let them know that you know what the others are talking about. So don't dismiss other arguments because you want to appear more sophisticated. Be respectful. Do not attempt to reinvent the world. You have to contextualize your work. You're not, again, in a bubble. You're always in a context. Situate your work in this context. You're not a monad that is completely independent. No. And also don't pretend that there's a world outside. Again, don't try to be original. Not only because this usually is embarrassing, but because you're always already. No one has done the work before that you're doing. It's an original already, always already. So don't make it an imperative to be original. And the last one, of course, it sounds a bit horrible, but don't have an opinion. It means, of course, you have an opinion, but this is not an opinion piece. No one asks about your opinion. You have to clarify things. You have to do research. You have to use evidence and so on. Know the rules. It's not about your opinion. No one cares. In this context, no one cares about your opinion. Don't make assumptions either. If you make assumptions, you have to base them in academic research. Speaking of research, you should be able to demonstrate that you have a broad understanding of your area of research. This is important. You have to know your field. You have what's going on in your field. You have to be able to make a contribution to this field. In order to do that, you have to know your field. Build a theoretical reference system and overview of this field, of what's going on in your field. Of course, depending on your field, it cannot be that extensive, but you have to show that you know what's going on. And I think in the US, it's quite common to do a lit review, at least in the social sciences, which is similar to this. You give an overview, identify key theories and theorists that have examined the topic and the ideas explored by you. Again, you are not alone. It's really probable that someone else has researched the topic that you are trying to do research on. Acknowledge those people. Okay, formalities. Again, on structure. There's not that many rules, but there's these rules, and you really have to adhere to those. Every thesis or every dissertation must include a table of contents, and this is important. Really, it has to have consecutively numbered subchapters. So there's an introduction. In the introduction, you point out your overall question, or as Chris always used to phrase it, where are you going with this? I did not forget. So usually it's, of course, the last part you write, because you cannot know beforehand what you write in your introduction because you don't know what you will be writing. But sometimes it makes sense to write it in the beginning, to write two versions. Write the first draft, because in doing so, you draft the very outline of your dissertation. By doing so, you give it your own structure. You give it structure. You outline your research question, and you outline the research questions that are related to it. In the end, of course, we write it, and it will be completely different. So it's more like an exercise for yourself to pre-write this introduction. There's the main text, that's self-explanatory, and I really cannot say anything about that. There's the conclusion, where some would say in the conclusion you bring your thesis to a full circle, because you summarize your main conclusion or your main contribution, ideally, and you always again relate this to your initial question. So this is why you come full circle, because here the golden thread comes back. Ideally, you're a step closer in answering it, but this is not the main point. In some cases, you want to recommend further research or just acknowledge the limits of your own work. Bibliography is clear. What is important, and we also will get back to this, you need a consistent, or use a consistent citation system. You can use any citation style you wish, as long as you use it consistently. This is important. There's also some software to format references, but I'm the wrong person to talk about that. While writing. So first of all, it's important for you to realize that you are the expert in your field. Well, you're to become the expert in the field. So write for those who are not. Again, don't be pretentious, don't try to show off, just address those who are not experts in your field. Clarify and define your key concepts, which also means refrain from making generalized statements at all costs. Don't use concepts without any prior critical engagement. Don't use concepts such as sustainability, progress, development, you name it. Don't use them without any prior critical engagement, because those are the most dangerous terms, because you assume or presume a universal meaning. And that's the most violent thing you can do. So differentiate, question, do not take anything for granted, because there is no common sense. Common sense is probably the most violent of all. Nuance these definitions, as well as respective debates around them. So you also have to acknowledge that there's debates around these words. There is no consensus on what development means or sustainability. So it's also a good start maybe to delve into this discourses. So don't just use references. Don't just throw in names, but elaborate on them. Refrain from unsubstantiated assertions or normative assumptions. Again, if you assert something, you have to give it substance, theoretical grounding. don't make normative assumptions. I cannot highlight this enough because it's always happening. This is not your task. As far as references are concerned, don't just throw them in. Don't just say, Derrida says that, Derrida thinks that. That's not enough. You should really elaborate, and then you have to create a context for the quote. You have to introduce it, quote it, talk about it. Again, refrain from standardized and fashionable phrases. All these concepts, don't use them according to the so-called common usage. This is an academic work, and your job is to question everything, almost. So this means that you have to aim at a philosophical grounding, and in order to do so, you have to avoid truisms at all costs. That's your enemy. Again, provide a clearly recognizable golden thread. Your research question needs to thread its way through the entire text. This is, if there's only one thing you take away from this, you have to have a golden thread. And this golden thread has to be present throughout a whole text. So always think everything in terms of your research question and your research or your problematic. Everything revolves around this. That's, again, the center of your universe. And then you add what others have said about it, if they have said anything about it. Especially mention those that you disagree with. Otherwise, it's very selective and clearly not professional. So first, state your research question or your thesis, whatever you name it, then link it to existing research. There's only very few cases that there is no existing research, and in this case, I would say don't do it. It doesn't matter if you agree or disagree, you just have to prove that you are aware of the state of the art. So, before you start writing, you have to have a broad structure or a broad pattern on how to proceed. Do all the things, all the concepts, everything that you mentioned, do they really serve your overall questions? Or are they just name dropping, idea dropping, whatever? And then you ask yourself, what evidence do you have to back you up on this? Because it's nice to have a backup, you know. Again, you're not alone in the world, and it's nice to find someone who supports your ideas. Some technicalities, as insinuated above, academic writing uses a very technical language, mostly at least, that is a very specialized vocabulary. Make sure that you know this vocabulary in your field, in your area, because some words have different meanings in different areas, which can be very embarrassing. Make sure you know your jargon. There's also this thing called hedging or vague language. This means, or this is to avoid coming across too strong. So since you're not discussing absolute facts that are irrefutable, this kind of makes sense. And you practice hedging by using phrases like it suggests, it seems, you know, just it's not to weaken your point, but to be more inclusive and to not proclaim a truth. It makes sense, as you cannot know everything, and you should not pretend to know everything, because this is not the point of a thesis, to show that you know everything. There's tons of different viewpoints and interpretations, and what seems factual or what seems true today might be obsolete tomorrow. And this you respect by practicing hedging. Two more very basic and very personal suggestions for my own practice. Do not attempt to practice productive writing. Writing is not a product, but it's the very process. And it really makes you feel inhibited. This is not the goal, to create a product. After you're done writing, get a proofreader. You will not be able to see anything anymore. You will not see any mistakes in your text anymore. So that's very basic, but quite important. Suggestions. Now we enter the even drier territory of citation. Again and again and again. You need to back up your writing. You need to back up your writing and thinking with the writing and the thinking of others. You need to engage theories and theorists in order to develop your topic, and you should not just touch upon them en passant or just in passing, or for the pure sake of mentioning them. Again, name dropping. You should not just add up sources, but use them, really use them. This means, again, you need an overall theoretical reference system or a basis from which your work unfolds. Obviously, these references have to be trustworthy and waterproof. You always have to ask yourself the quite kind of evident questions: who published it, where is it published, who is this person, and so on. References is also show that you have done your homework, or if you have done your homework, because you really have to, again, know what's going on. And by acknowledging this, what is happening in your field, you also acknowledge where you are coming from, you know, what the basis for your writing is, what helped you develop your own argument. So that's also a kind of academic integrity. You show where you're coming from. But at the same time, always be sure that you use your own voice and your own arguments and not just other people's ideas. So don't be too timid, don't be too shy, don't overquote. Only quote what's relevant to your topic or your question. So use the sources and relate them to yours, because no one is interested in a compilation of sources. It's about your words, it's about your ideas. And the thesis is not a book report or a report on how others, how experts deal with something in a very expert way. This is not the point. So the point is, what do you think? So ideally, also don't just quote, but as I said before, you put the quote in context. You introduce the quote and then you elaborate on it. The text should be in flow. It should not be a random succession of quotes. The same goes for paragraphs. Paragraphs also help you structure your text. So Umberto Eco established 10 rules, namely when and how to quote. Comes in very handy, and we will get back to this. But the first one is quote the object of your interpretive analysis with reasonable abundance. Versus the second one, quote the critical literature only when its authority corroborates or confirms your statements. This means, first, don't quote passages that are too long, because this leads to very generalized analysis, and you don't really engage with the text anymore if it's too long. In the worst case, you can make use of an appendix, but of course it's not really recommended. As for the second rule, make sure that the critical literature that you're using either says something new, because there has to be a point on why you mention it, and it should confirm your point in a way that is convincing. So it should be a source that has some credibility. The next and third rule is quite self-evident, but it's very important. If you don't want readers to presume that you share the opinion of the quoted author, you must include your own critical remarks before or after the passage. It may sound really self-evident, but it's not. Then another practical tip regarding foreign language sources, because some of you will work with foreign languages and with texts that are in foreign languages, not in your first language, that is. ECHO suggests that you always quote your primary source in the original language. So this is debatable, especially not coming from literary studies, but I think he has a point, that it is mandatory for literary works, and that you use the original language and then maybe add a translation or something. Because even if you're not analyzing the literary style of an author, but more the idea, if the expression, the exact expression that the author uses has a certain weight, then you should work with the text in the original language, if possible. Also, in these cases, add the translation in parentheses or in brackets, because the translation itself constitutes an interpretive exercise on your part. So translation is not innocent. Translation is a choice. But of course, if you only take a piece of information from an author, it doesn't make sense to introduce the secondary or foreign language. You can just use a good translation, or also use your own translation if you're so inclined. The same goes for writers who are poets or who are coming from literature, or who are creative writers. If you only want to convey information from them, you don't have to use the original. So last, not least, the last rule, he argues rather dramatically. And he says, quotes are like testimony in a trial, and you must always be able to track down the witnesses and demonstrate their reliability. For this reason, the reference must be exact and accurate. Do not quote from an author without indicating the book and page number, and it must be verifiable. This also should go without saying, but yes, it has to be exact, accurate, verifiable. And then let us move to even drier territories: paraphrasing versus citation, main differences. This comes up quite often. Paraphrasing simply means that you explain someone else's ideas in your own words. So of course you need to reference the author. You cannot make it seem as if it were yours, but the info is the same, just that it is conveyed in your own words. And in this case, it's always really important that you use your own voice. You should not copy the author's language, or you should not copy the author's style when paraphrasing. Always make sure, again, that it is your idea that at the center, and the paraphrase is there to support it. In order to do so, you may not only want to use different words, but also you have to use different words, but a different style. But you also may want to use a different sequencing to make it even more distinct. In general, it's considered better to paraphrase than to quote, because it suggests that you have a grasp of the source, that you have understood the idea well enough so that you can paraphrase it, because you are able to reframe it in your own words, and it makes you feel or seem more expert. There's a final clue that I want to give by echo. Regarding this, the most reassuring test of your paraphrases will come when you're able to paraphrase the text without looking at it. This will mean not only that you have avoided plagiarism, but that also have understood the text you're paraphrasing. So this is a good exercise that you may want to try. Sometimes it's, however, about the writing as such. In this case, paraphrasing misses the point or the form in this case. So if you want to quote a certain author who is known for his her very distinct form of or elaborated writing or whatever, then if you want to reproduce the style, then you want to do a quotation and not a paraphrase, because in this case it's really about the form as much as it is about the content. So my suggestion would be you paraphrase when you want to convey information, because information can be paraphrased and style cannot. Whenever it's about the concept as such, paraphrase. When there's a specific language, when there's a specific language needed for understanding, then quote. If you want to comment on a very specific point or passage, quote. If you want to refer to the main idea, paraphrase. And you can still quote within the paraphrase. To quote, we remember, is to quote verbatim. Unless you make changes to the text, but then you have to mark them as your changes. Always use, yes, it's evident, but seriously, it's quite important. Always use quotation marks, or in the case of more extensive quotes, indent the quote. Otherwise, it's simply plagiarism if you only copy a text and do not add quotation marks. So a quote has always to be recognizable as a quote. That's the most important point. Which leads us to the next point, namely you have to attribute a source if an idea or a finding or a word or a concept is not entirely yours. You have to always acknowledge all of your sources. You have to attribute all sources in a way that can be retraced. So Derrida says, does not suffice, even though it's a very noble gesture that you even mentioned Derrida, but you have to make it more clear. Also, this is important, you may want to acknowledge the influence or impact other people had on you, because sometimes it's not as clear that you can quote something because it has not been brought to you in the form of a quote, of a citation, but maybe a person has brought you to a conclusion or to an epiphany, and you really want to mention this person. This is called integrity. So whenever an idea or a concept is not common knowledge, you have to attribute it. So always better quote too much. And what is common knowledge and what is not is quite debatable. It's a tricky and it's a slippery slope, because common knowledge can be quite common or not. So yes, quote more than you would. 3 more quotable instructions, traps, and conventions by Eco. Do not attribute to an author an idea that he cites as belonging to someone else. So if Eco quotes Agamben's notion of bare life, do not assume that Eco has coined this notion. It's very simple, but you sometimes get caught up in the middle of writing. So always make sure that you're quoting the quote. There's also a method for citing indirect quotes or indirect sources while still observing the rules of academic honesty, because this will happen to you quite a lot, that someone cites someone else and you don't know how to reference to it. In this case, you just write as quoted in or quoted according to. So always make sure that you reference that. Also, always give precise information about critical editions, revisions, and the like, because if there's a new or edited version or a revised edition, of course, things may have changed. And you want to acknowledge that, because the author wouldn't be that happy probably if they were still quoted something that they don't believe anymore. Explore different citation styles, MLA, Chicago, APA. Again, feel free to choose your own, but use it consistently and accurately. So, for example, I have my own weird citation style that I copied somewhere 20 years ago or something like that. It's a combination. It doesn't matter which one you use. These are the most traditional, the classical ones. Doesn't matter. You feel free to make your own, to choose, but it has to be consistent and accurate. And look at those the home pages of these sites if you need some guidance. So I don't want to delve too much into it. The APA is the American Psychological Associations. It's mostly used in the social sciences. It's all about accuracy. It's all about being concise and clear. The year of publication is always the most important. The name or gender is less so. The MLA, you probably all know that, mostly used in the humanities, liberal arts, and so on. And Chicago Manual of Style, that also humanities, but especially history. Chicago uses two different citation or documentation systems, and I will get back to this later, namely author date and notes and bibliography. And MLA and APA use in-text citation. That is, you briefly mention the source directly in the text and directly after the quote. And you add a full list of references or of works cited, whatever it is named. Footnotes, which is again part of Chicago and part of many other citation systems, provide the reference at the very bottom of the very page. So, if possible, use footnotes rather than endnotes, because it's really quite annoying if you always have to go to the very end of the text in order to find your source. But yes, we will get back to this. There are two kinds of quotes from a text that you will interpret and quotes from a text that you will use to support your interpretation. So basically, there's primary texts that are the objects, so to speak, of your work. And then there's secondary literature, texts that support you in your interpretation. So first you have the object of your interpretation, and then you have critical literature that supports you, ideally supports you in this interpretation. Echo in a nutshell. And just one remark regarding my extensive use of echo, which will be following. One can, of course, debate if echo should be the primary and the authoritative source for obvious reasons. But he wrote this book, again, I showed it, in, I think, 1977. And it's still valid for most fields, and quite most of its points are still valid. It still, this is important, in large or to a great extent reflects the practice in academia. And that also says something. That's more than 40 years. So I'm using him as a framework, while of course always including my own experience. So, echo, quotes must be accurate. And all this is very general. First, transcribe the words exactly as they appear. And you will all agree that this is important, but most people don't do it. Second, do not omit text from a quote without indicating your omission with an ellipsis. You know, this, oops, sorry. 3 consecutive periods with or without brackets in place of the omitted part. Third, do not make interpolations without clearly signaling them. Each of your comments or clarifications and specifications must appear enclosed in brackets. So you cannot just add comments without making them your own. Finally, we must also indicate emphasis that are ours rather than the author's by adding after the quote and enclosed in brackets a formula such as emphasis mine. If the author that you quote, despite his worthiness of mention, makes an evident mistake, and these things should happen, they happen, you must respect his mistake, but you must indicate it. And this is usually indicated by the word sic, I don't know how to pronounce this in English, S-I-C, followed by an exclamation mark, and it's in square brackets after the quote. So you acknowledge that the author has made a mistake, but you also respect the mistake because you cannot change it. In general, we already dealt with the difference between quoting and paraphrasing. But again, really, quotes must be accurate. Otherwise, you are not just sloppy, but you also commit plagiarism to a certain extent. It's also not fair to misquote someone because you're changing their intended meaning. And I think we should also pay respect to that because you make them other by not quoting accurately. Because maybe you should think of every quote as a piece of thought that you should be faithful, that you want to be faithful to. It does matter. And of course, this also applies to omissions because it's an active choice. If you want to omit something, the way you omit it, the way you add stuff, it also makes a difference. So refrain from adding your words and be fair to the author. So this is the last point in this case. Always emphasize that it is you who adds or removes or emphasizes. Then we still have to cover footnotes versus author date system. I really want to make this short because you can look that up. Author date, as already mentioned, simply means that the author's name and the year of the publication is placed within the brackets, within brackets in the text, you know. This is followed then by a full reference list at the very end of the text. And some claim, especially in social sciences, that this is more efficient. So Eco argues that this is the better way of cite, or not the better way, but in some cases the more appropriate way of citing, because in that way you only have to reference a book once. You don't have to do it twice. You also avoid what he calls annoying little notes full of ibidem, or this one. It is also effective if you write a critical literature review when you have like a full list of references one after the other, because otherwise you would always have to make the reference or the note. And it has, however, certain limits, and it only works if you have a very or rather homogeneous and specialized bibliography. Because if you use many different sources, many different authors, the author date system usually doesn't really work. But I personally am a big fan of footnotes, and yes, this is not objective. My favorite part is that you're able to add extras. So you cannot only cite, but you can also add whatever you don't want to add in the main text, or whatever you don't have space to add, whatever you don't feel is appropriate to add. You can also use footnotes for that. So yes, you have to document the reference twice, but I think that's a thing you can do. And also the bibliography is of course much more extensive. There you not only have the last name, but also the first name and so on. So it's completely different, I would say. So there's various ways how you can use notes. Echo mentions them extensively, of course, and he said you can use notes, for example, to support a quote or to introduce a supporting quote that would have interrupted the text. So you can also just add the quote that is supporting your main argument or your reference without destroying the flow of your text. But of course, you can also add additional supporting bibliography references to a topic you discuss in the text. For example, on this topic, see so and so. So you can always reference even further, and you can make it like a self-referential system. So you can also expand on statements that you made in the text. Again, that there's no space in the text for that. You can make quite lots of expansions. You can also correct statements in the text, which is rather rare. I've never done it, but you can do it. Of course, you can also use it to provide translations or provide a quote in the original. So if you want to use a lot of translations, notes are much better than in text. Then you also can use it for external, but also internal cross-references. So once you have treated a topic, you just add CF, which means confer, Latin, to bring together, to refer the reader to a different book. You can see also, see this chapter or this section of the text, so you can refer even further. Last not least, and in allusion to what we already mentioned, Echo affirms that we should use notes to pay our debts. It's a good rule of academic honesty to mention in a note that, for example, a series of original ideas in your text could not have been born without inspiration from a particular work or from a private conversation with the scholar. I already mentioned that. I think it's a very nice gesture to acknowledge the people that helped you or that supported you along the way. Now I just want to briefly mention a few quite catchy phrases that Echo uses in order to make his points. Some of them convince me more than others, but I think it's quite pertinent to our topic. You are not Proust. Do not write long sentences. If they come into your head, write them, but then break them down. Do not be afraid to repeat the subject twice, and stay away from too many pronouns and subordinate clauses. This is a tricky one, and of course I'm guilty of this myself. When I wrote my first thesis, it was in German, and German is known for rather long sentences, so I'm glad that English taught me better. But yes, of course, you want to brag a little bit and you want to be stylish and everything, but you don't have to aim for a literature prize, as it's still a thesis. And you don't want to use mannerisms too much, because for instance, if I read sentences that are too fabricated, or that are the sentences are just too long, I'm not as patient as I should be. So also think about the audience again. I would again recommend staying true to your style. So don't pretend to be someone else. And a style that you probably already developed and that you're comfortable with. And there's no point in denying your voice and denying yourself. Academic writing can be stylish too, but make sure that you are intelligible. Find a balance, and this is a thin line, I know. Find a balance between your personal voice and impersonal intelligibility. Yes, Heidegger wrote to make itself intelligible is the suicide of philosophy, famous quote, but A, ideally you're not Heidegger, and B, this quote aims to prove what I said earlier, that you should not drop names for the pure sake of dropping them, because it makes no sense to mention Heidegger here, because he was referring to something completely different. You are not E.E. Cummings. You are not an avant-garde poet, not even if your thesis is on avant-garde poetry. If you write a thesis on Caravaggio, are you then a painter? And if you write a thesis on the style of the futurists, please do not write as a futurist writes. This is important advice because nowadays many tend to write alternative theses in which the rules of critical discourse are not respected. But the language of the thesis is a meta language, that is, a language that speaks of other languages. Well, I agree, but of course I also disagree. The language of the thesis is meta thinking also. It's not only meta language, but also meta thinking. Because it's thinking that thinks about other thinkings, about the thinkings of others. So it is unique and peculiar. It is your voice, and yet you want to be understood. And this is the most tricky part, perhaps, of academic writing. The thin line between knowing the game, joining the game, participating in it while still keeping your own voice. This, everyone has to do it for themselves. Of course, you don't want to just add another standardized thesis. But I cannot emphasize this enough, be confident that your thinking is original enough. That your language is above all a reflection of your thinking. So your language should not be burdened with reflecting the originality of your thought. So don't use language for that purpose. Respect the rules in order to be heard, and afterwards, by all means, question them. That's your job. But yes, trust that your thinking is original enough. Begin new paragraphs often. Do so when logically necessary and when the pace of the text requires it. But the more you do it, the better. This is a very technical advice that should be adhered to, I think. So break the text in chunks so it's more structured. It helps to separate and distinguish thoughts from each other. So maybe you want to start a new paragraph for each new thought, and you also may want to highlight them by giving it a new paragraph. What is important, you really should connect these paragraphs. Don't let them just stand there alone. This has to do again with the structure. But yes, begin new paragraphs often. It's true. Structure your argument, identify it, differentiate it, and break it into chunks. So actually you're moving from the more general to the more specific. Let it guide you. Don't try to master it. Write everything that comes into your head, but only in the first draft. You may notice that you get carried away with your inspiration and you lose track of the center of your topic. In this case, you can remove the parenthetical sentences and the digressions, or you can put each in a note or an appendix. Your thesis exists to prove the hypothesis that you devised at the outset, not to show the breadth of your knowledge. Well, this is partially true, but of course, he did not really tailor his book to dissertations as much as to thesis, because in a dissertation, it's of course it's pertinent, or it's expected of you to show that you have extensive knowledge of your field. That's your job. You don't have to show the breadth, you have to show the breadth of your knowledge. But of course, his point is that it's not about showing up. But you should make a contribution. In order to do so, you have to show that you know. So I disagree. At the same time, it's also good advice, because maybe it takes fear of the white page, because many people are afraid of the famous white page. Just start writing. Don't be scared. Think of your writing as a draft. Not every sentence has to be perfect, by no means. You can always polish it later. Some or many are intimidated by perfection, so just write words and then embed them in syntax later. And structure, of course. Use the advisor as a guinea pig. You must ensure that the advisor reads the first chapters and eventually all the chapters far in advance of the deadline. His reactions may be useful to you. If the advisor is busy or lazy, ask a friend. Ask if he understands what you're writing. Do not play the solitary genius. This, of course, depends on the supervisor and, of course, also on you. If you're happy with sharing, you should absolutely do it. And this is important. Talk about this to your supervisor well in advance before you start writing with them. Define the intensity of your contact, because not all supervisors want to read everything you want to share. Some want to read everything you share. Especially in the case of a dissertation, it's really important to also define your needs. Do you need a helping hand? Do you need someone who supports you a lot? Are you more of an independent writer? Just think about it. What do you need? And then also look for a supervisor according to your needs. How much supervision do you need? So it's sometimes okay if you only show them after you have finished your first draft. Sometimes it's not okay, but yes, again, talk to them well before the deadline, so they can actually have a look at, or that you actually can get feedback. The supervisor is, of course, the best guinea pig, because ideally they're an expert in your field. But if they cannot be, someone else can be, or at least pretend to be. So you will notice that you're no longer be able to look at your text after a while. So you should really need a new set of eyes, or you need a new person to look at it for the first time. So this is really important. This is maybe even more important than proofreading. Always define a term when you introduce it for the first time. If you do not know the definition of a term, avoid using it. If it is one of the principal terms of your thesis and you are not able to define it, call it quits. You have chosen the wrong thesis. It's a bit drastic, but I agree. Yes, your thesis is not for you to show off or brag, but you should take yourself seriously, and all others too. So do your homework. It relates also to what we discussed earlier. Don't take any term for granted. There is no common sense. Then, last not least, and you will notice that there's a yellow thing that should be a footnote, and I will read this in a second. I or we. Should the student introduce his opinions in the first person? Some believe that this is more honest than using the majestic plural. I disagree. A writer says we because he presumes that his readers can share with what he's saying. Writing is a social act. I write so that you, as the reader, accept what I propose to you. At the most, I think, the student can try to avoid personal pronouns by adopting more impersonal expressions, such as therefore, one should conclude that it then seems granted that one should say at this point, I think the student can write, the article previously quoted shows us that, because these types of expressions do not imply any personalization of the academic discourse. Yes, this is Umberto Eco, Italian, 1977. Still, I would not say that this thinking has passed. You will find many people who still believe in this argumentation. But what is interesting, that the translators of the book in the English edition added the footnote saying that despite Eco's compelling argument regarding this topic, his advice in this paragraph does not necessarily reflect current English usage. Yes, because this debate is an old one, and it is almost overcome, I would say, in the Anglo-Saxon world at least. So there's this old debate which voice you should use, I or we. Was taboo for a very long time. Also, when I started my degree, it was not okay to use I. After a few years, all of a sudden, it was actually required to use I. So I was always deemed not objective enough, because a thesis is not about you, after all. It should not be about you, they say. And only used in personal reflective writing. So only in these very, I don't know, reflective writing pieces, it's okay if you actually admit that you're a person. So it was always deemed important to use a passive voice with the subject at the end, a mere description of what happens. And this was always considered to be more formal, more objective. So the less personal, the better. And again, now things have changed. And some publishers even ask for first person or active voice. So that means the subject is doing something. But yes, of course, you cannot use I feel or I hate. But yes, you talk about that with your supervisor, how they feel about it, because there's lots of controversy still, especially outside the Anglo-Saxon world. And I think I'm basically done. There's some more that I could add, but I think we probably have had enough technicalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you. We are scheduled, I think, for a 2-hour go. Probably we can take a few extra minutes. Why don't we take a 5-7 minute break for those who can use that, and then I'll come back. I can shorten my remarks. Julie has covered a lot of material, and I can perhaps I know that I can be more brief than I had planned to. So I think we can come in close to our concluding time. But let us take a quick break and then come back in, as I say, 5 to 7 minutes. Thank you. The few remarks I want to make, but let me try to do it in about 20 minutes, and then we'll go from there with questions. I think could you hit the slide? Yeah, thank you. So first of all, Julia, thank you. You covered an incredible amount of material, and I noticed in the chat that people are asking if it's possible to have some of your slides, but also to see this in a recording. And with your permission, we'll work that out in an appropriate presentation. And I was, as you were speaking, I was thinking to myself, you know, a lot of this is going to be particularly useful once people are underway. By which I mean, I was thinking about when you're talking about paraphrase versus quotation or citation, and I realized as you were describing the problem, I thought, yes, this is a very nice way of phrasing what's going on here. But it's sort of not until you're in the process that you quite realize what's being said. And so if we have this as a resource tool for the students, I think it will be really valuable. There was one thing that I wanted to pick up in relation to what you were saying. You started out with a very strong statement about what is academic and what is not, and that's help. It's, you know, it really is. It's an academic question, which you treated in a very academic style. And I did want to acknowledge, and this is important. I want to nuance here. I want to acknowledge that a good number of our students are not academics in a you know, in the sense that they are professionally oriented in that respect. And I haven't, you know, we haven't done a demographics this year as yet. It's you know, it's quite a new year in that respect. But I don't know. I would say that perhaps even 50% are not going into an academic career, so that they are not necessarily aspiring to join the game, so to speak, as you phrased it at certain points. And to those, but I want to. This is why I'm nuancing. So they might say, well, that's not really me. I'm not an academic. You know, I'm not. I don't want to become a professional academic. But at the same time, what we are trying to do is create a context in which the work that's done in the theses can be presented academically and meets academic standards. Oftentimes, you know, people some people know exactly where they're going. Maybe they're in the arts, maybe they work in museums, galleries, whatever. But sometimes opportunities come in the future that are surprising, and it is possible to go take an academic route, or showing the thesis becomes an important thing. And so we want to help the students meet academic standards. So that, and in the sense that a PhD or an MA thesis done at the EGS can be presented anywhere for any professional job. So I think that what Julia was presenting as what counts as academic, or what constitutes the academic, is valuable. I just wanted to, you know, to address those who are don't necessarily feel identified with the academic. So we are training in a form, but at the same time, this doesn't mean that, you know, either you're an academic or you don't belong here. That's really not what I think what should be taken away from this. I was going to add something in that respect, but maybe it'll come back to me. I lost it. Well, yes, let me go to my next point. I have to be quick. So the fact that a thesis, MA thesis or a PhD, is an academic exercise is actually very helpful for people going into this process. One of the difficult, and this is, I'm going to be touching upon 2 points at the same time. One of the questions that is really very important to come to grips with as you're writing is the question of audience. Who are you writing this for? For people who don't have a lot of experience in writing, now some of you are professional writers, and so this is not really for you, but For those who don't have significant experience in writing and publishing, or writing something like an academic thesis, the question of the public can sometimes become very problematic. And when you realize that you're undertaking an academic exercise, that you're fulfilling an academic requirement, gives you a framework, gives you a context for undertaking the writing. And all of the things that Julia was talking about as things to consider and to work with, and citations and so on and so forth, all of these are devices. All of these are tools for doing the thesis. I mean, they are requirements, they are expectations, they're conventions, and so forth, but they're also tools. And using the quotation in the way she was saying is extremely valuable for working through an argument. If you have found you find your topic, you find what authors are most pertinent, and particularly with authors that are sort of right at the core of your problematic, you'll want to do a lot of careful reading with them, and attentive, close reading, analytical reading. Now that's important because you want to demonstrate what your argument. You want to convey what it is you want to get at in these texts, and your way of getting at them, the significance of the text. But it is also a very useful device for generating pages. I mean, it's my joke, which I use all the time, is when in doubt, explicate. Go to the text and start reading the text. And if your thesis has a strong textual dimension, page numbers are really it's not going to be a significant question. Again, what I'm trying to say is a lot of these conventions are actually tools and very helpful devices, for writing. So, the fact that it's academic, it's sort of like double-edged. You want to say, oh, it's just kind of dry. It's just a particular form of writing that doesn't turn me on. Well, okay, but at the same time, it gives you frameworks for undertaking what you want to achieve. Now, about the public, a lot of students come in with the ambition of writing something, and this is particularly true of EGS students, and this is because we have a group that is very independent-minded, very creative. Many of our group are artists, or working in the arts, or creative writing, or they have a very strong creative impetus, and they come in with the sense that, well, if I'm going to do something like this, I want it to reflect me. I want it to be, an achievement that speaks to my concerns and my ambitions creatively. And so one will get then, and this is all good, but one will then get statements like, well, in my book, I want to do this. And as soon as I hear that phrase, my book, I get scared. Because that suggests a projection of an end product that can be very, very a very difficult thing to bear. And so to say my book, you're speaking to an audience that is extremely hard to define. Some people are narcissistic enough that that's not a problem. They just write it for themselves. It's my book. But most often, if someone is envisioning a book instead of a thesis, they really are putting quite a burden upon themselves in terms of the construction of their public. And I always try to sort of caution at that point and say, you're not writing a book, you're writing a thesis. And this is really initially for a very limited audience. This is for your advisor, and then for that committee. You'll show it to your friends, perhaps, or maybe not. You might show it to your family, maybe not. But first of all, you're answering the expectations of the thesis form. And that is, again, that can be, you might say, oof, but think of this as a framework, as a way of defining for yourself the audience to whom you're speaking. And I think you will find that this lessens the burden, lessens the pressure. Now, all of that said, I do want to emphasize, Julia said this, and I think it's very important. You should be addressing a topic that moves you, that is important to you, that you feel passionate about. A thesis will sometimes require you to get through periods that are not easy. I mean, you might feel it's not working, whatever. It might be even a little bored, whatever. But you want to have this passion and this energy coming from this passion to carry you through. So it should be something that's important to you in some way or other, something that touches you, concerns you. And so I'm trying to say, yes, the academic framework is useful for doing this, but that's not to say it should be dry as a topic. On the contrary, it should be something that really is that speaks to you in some important way. I wanted to say one thing about at certain moments, as Julia was speaking, I said, "Oh my, I think people are going to get scared." Maybe in the first part, particularly. And I thought to myself, so how does an EGS student in particular feel going into thesis writing? And again, we have a very heteroclite group. There's no way to generalize on this point, but it is frequently the case that students coming to us have a, how can I say, well, are not academically oriented in the strong professional sense. And so they will be often a bit anxious. Can I meet these kinds of standards? This is not my background. I'm not a philosopher. I often hear that. I'm not this or that. I'm not a literary critic. I am interested in art. I'm interested in music. And what I want to say very quickly on this point is I would urge you not to underestimate the nature of the training you're getting. Now, the EGS has a very intensive structure, right? We meet in small periods of time, in bursts, in powerful, intensive bursts. And these then pass, and we wait for a good period, and then it happens again. Let me just say in parentheses, we're going to try to fill in that period a little bit more as we go forward using this new online platform. But nevertheless, there is this intensive structure, and this can concern people. They say, well, I don't have the same experience as I would if I were in a normal graduate program. And that's true. But let me assure you, in relation to those normal graduate programs, that you're getting a fairly incredible training. Now, there are some programs which are just full-time for 4 years, which is a very special kind of thing. But if you look at most programs in Europe in particular, and then if you look at the quality of most programs in North America, then you consider what you're doing at the EGS, and you will see that you're having a remarkable training. So by the time you come to the PhD, in particular, you will have been through 24 seminars, right? And through those 24 these are 24 seminars with very, very high level people. In the course of those 24 seminars, you will have written some assessment papers. You'll have done some writing. Many of you will have embarked on various projects. You'll be writing articles and so on and so forth. But the core I want to emphasize is that you will have been through 24 seminars with master teachers. And in the course of those seminars, you will be observing how people think and how people construct problematics, how they pose a question, how they approach the question, how they move through the question. And part of choosing a supervisor is that you will gravitate towards certain people in the way they think. And you will have learned by the time you're well into your PhD program, you'll have learned what a gesture of thinking looks like, or a form of questioning looks like. You should trust that this is happening, because many of you will say, well, I don't feel that. Well, no, but it's going to come, and this is related to what I was saying about the curriculum in my orientation meeting. Let this happen. It is happening, and it will inform your approach to what you're doing. So when it comes to writing, you'll be in a position to undertake the kind of process that Julia has been describing. And then I think I would look again at what Julia said, and it will speak to you in that way. And then I wanted to, I'll just add one point, and then I'll stop. I think. Oh, I did want to say I'm trying to figure out what the poor guinea pigs, what their role is. I've lost the meaning of that term, a guinea pig. And I was thinking, well, maybe the advisor is more like a canary in a coal mine. You have to see if it dies. I'm thinking of some earlier seminar work this session. But anyway, I wanted to, what was it? I made a joke and I lost my point. Oh, here it is. I want to just underscore. I mean, I want to say you will be through an extraordinary experience through these seminars. It will be inspiring. And when it comes time then to write your thesis, you may experience trepidation, but I'm quite certain that you will have the means. And I want to underscore that you should look forward to this. It's going to be a really invaluable experience. A PhD is something that's always with you. At least in my experience and people that I know, it's something that will stay with you in all sorts of ways. It'll be like a source of thinking, of resources, in the sense of research questions and background. It'll be a source for you over many, many years. It will mark you, but it will give this work that you do in this thesis. It will give back, so to speak, and I think that you will find it a very special experience. It's a rite of passage. In fact, if you are becoming an academic, it's a rite of passage, and it is an extremely important rite of passage. But for anyone, this writing experience, this creative experience, this thinking experience, it is very marking, and I would urge you to look forward to it. It will hold some difficult moments, but it will also hold some thrilling moments. One thing I was going to say in terms of process, once you undertake your work, try to write all the time. Try to write every day if you can, or at least 5 days a week. If only 10 minutes, but stay with it. Try to keep the writing flowing. Writing is, at least in my experience, and I've heard from many others, writing is a curious thing. It requires rhythm, or rather, when writing happens, some kind of rhythm has taken the writer. And for that, you need to, I'm going to jump metaphors, you need to prime the pump a little bit. You need to get it moving. I can tell you, when I write something, if I haven't been writing in a month or two, the first day, I'll often write no more than a paragraph. And I throw that paragraph out the next day because it was just stilted and awful. And I just, no, I got to do this again. The next day normally will be better. After about 4 days, I'll write maybe 3 to 5 pages a day. But it's something is starting to take. But it's very important to keep that going. So I do want to urge you to, when you start writing your thesis, make this an ongoing project, and to the extent you can, a daily project. Even if it's just a little bit, but make, Avital Ronell has a great video in our archive on thesis writing. She said, make an appointment with yourself, right? It's like an appointment with the doctor. You know, if someone says, can I get together with you at 10 for coffee? Say, no, I've got an appointment at that time. And that appointment is your writing. Be sure to give yourself that time. And because it's important to you, and it's important that you maintain this. So, there are a couple of videos up. I'll conclude on this note. There are a couple of videos up in our video archive. I did a presentation on thesis writing last year. You'll hear a couple of phrases I think I used last year. original in these things, but it was in Malta. I did this, and it was fun actually. It was with a group of people. I was having a good time. And then also there's one Abital did way back in 2013, I think, and you've got to see her performance of the little corporate team that she's got working in when she writes something like a thesis. There's the secretary, and there's doing her nails and couldn't give a shit about what's being assigned to her. There's the super ego that she gives a credit card to go spend some money, enjoy yourself, get off my back so that I can write my first draft. You know, it's a wonderful sort of deconstruction of this burden of writing and deconstructing it in terms of the different offices involved. But again, and this is, you know, we've tried to offer ideas, insights about how it works, about what's required of you. This is an ongoing question for all of you who will be writing theses, and so you know, we will come back to it with you. Julia will be available, Nemanja, the other fellows, Pirooz, the other fellows are all available for advice, and we will be able to address your questions. So with that, let me open a little space now for questions. Nemanja, I don't know if you have been culling these by any chance. I noted one along the way.
I think Chris Zimmerman had the first question.
Christopher Zimmerman.
Okay.
Hello, thank you. Julia, thank you for your presentation. Just a quick question. I'm a little bit confused, which is not very difficult to do, but I have a question about the timing of our submission of our PhD dissertation proposal in relationship to the end of the seminars. If I understood correctly, they will be due, you know, January 1st if we just finished our seminars. Is that?
Yes, let me say it again. I know it was very technical and detailed. Many students, by the time they are finishing their second year of PhD seminar work, will have already found a director, supervisor. Those students will then start, or after the classes end, after the seminars end, they'll start with that supervisor and they'll get underway. And the supervisor will tell them what is expected from them in terms of some form of proposal or an outline or an abstract, however they want to phrase that. Each supervisor will have their own expectations, and you should be sure you understand them from that person. But that's an individual matter. It's between you and the supervisor. That's if you have the supervisor by the time you are finished the second session, second year of courses, after you finish the 12 courses. Now, those students who haven't found a supervisor at that point for any reason are then with me, effectively, trying to put together a proposal or trying to conceive a proposal and figure out who best they can work with. And so for those students, those who finish in the summer, we are asking them to finish a proposal by December 1st, which will then be used to secure a director. And those who finish in the fall session, the one we're in now, will have until January 1st to do that proposal. And I will be available, the fellows will be available for thinking about this, for you know, constructing this and thinking about the supervisor that would be appropriate.
I guess my question is more of, I mean, the seminar period. I mean, for example, I mean, now I've just finished my 12th seminar. Judith Butler was my 12th one.
Where's the champagne?
Yeah, right. But for me, like just finishing, I mean, that's the beginning of this, my second year in a sense. Like these seminars have now given me enough work for the entire year. And yet it sounds like I need to submit a proposal. In other words, I've only been in the program since June of 2019. And it seems like, according to your time plan, that I should be entering my third year, and I've only been in the program for 16 months or something like that. So I'm wondering, like, I mean, shouldn't my PhD proposal and all of this happen like next fall? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, we somehow we've lost. If you think of the seminars as 1 year, you know, like once you've done the seminars, then within a month you're supposed to do your response papers. Then like that's done. So in other words, I've somehow lost about 6 months somewhere. You know what I'm saying?
I could be. You phrased it good. You phrased it well. And this has to do with it. So it's just the technicalities of the way we are doing record keeping. In our records, you are completing year 2, and you would begin supervision, which is year 3, in the fall. This is just our records. Y3 is how it appears in the record keeping. So what we are looking at is the completion of the seminars, not necessarily the years involved. See what I'm saying? It's the number of seminars that we are looking at, and once you complete the seminars, you are then qualified to write the thesis. Okay. But
at my rate, I mean, I'm going to finish the seminars in like 4 years. You know, I mean, writing these essays, response papers. In other words, I have to finish all of those in order to take the next step. And it's up to me to finish those.
Yes. In principle, you do those in 1 month. So we would finish this on October 24th, and by the end of November, you should have all the papers in. Christopher, on this point, I think you're raising an important point. I
mean, for me, it's about I can't finish them. I mean, in that time frame, but for me, the whole point of this is time, in a sense. And yes, I've just finished my second year, but I haven't had the time to actually. I mean, I'm still working on my essays from my first set of seminars.
Well, that's not good.
Or it's great. It depends on your perspective. You know what I'm saying? I mean, yeah, I understand that, but
let me say this. I think we should take your words into consideration here. Most students, in my experience, are actually chomping at the bit to get to the thesis after completing the 12 seminars. And many of them have already started, in fact. They've already been defining their problematics. Many of them are already hooked up with the professor, and we have to slow them down a little bit. We say, the professor can't start supervising you until you're qualified to enter supervision, and that means you have to finish the seminars. And I mean, I hate these kinds of strictures, but you know, there are structures that involve other people, including the supervisors. It is, yeah. I think that I think that the question here, in your case, the difficulty that's presented here is the assessment paper. And what is the reason this is a difficulty is that the assessment paper was never conceived as a paper. it was meant to be a kind of, in the strong sense of something that could be published, an essay or something like that. It was meant to be a response to a seminar that should be written very quickly. Now, some people don't do that. And it sounds like you don't do that. And I respect that. But sort of our system wasn't set up for that, for that case. And that's why I'm saying we need to think about what you're saying, because I respect the desire to write serious assessment papers. I do respect that. The assessment paper was created in order to meet requirements for our accreditation. They didn't exist in the past, but we brought it in. I've always thought it's a good idea because this helps people give feedback to professors, helps them organize their thoughts, and it's a very nice exercise. But we then enter this gray area when the question is just how much should a student be investing in this assessment paper? It sounds like you're investing a lot. Others don't do that, and I need to come to grips with that variation. But the real problem that you're addressing here is the assessment paper, because that's where the time issue is coming in. And so as I think about this, I need to consider what does this mean for your ability to make the next step then in terms of the proposal. So let me work on your question.
Thank you.
Hi, can you listen to me?
Yes, may I before,
I'm Margarida.
Who is it?
I'm Margarida. I have a question that actually relates to the one that was just posed. That is, what actually do you mean by a quick response to the seminars? Because I have just joined and I missed the first seminar, and then I jumped directly into the second. I have been attending all of them, but I am not very clear about what do you mean by a quick response to a seminar.
The way I've described it in the past is to say you should take something in that seminar that has spoken to you in some way and give some kind of response to it. You can use other work that you've done, past work, past experience, and develop in that way. You can look at the text that is being discussed, or you can discuss what the professor presented, and just give a response. It's something that you could do in one day. I know, for example, other students really do a lot more, and that's partly why we extended the time, because it used to be you were supposed to do it very, very quickly after the session when we first created this, but it's become clear we need to give more time. So Christopher seems to be asking for more time, and I need to think about this. But the idea of the response paper is that it's not a paper in what we might say a traditional seminar sense, where you have to do a research topic and develop the paper in a full academic form. And this goes to the question that Joachim Palting asked. So our assessment papers don't need to be academic writing, and I would say that's correct. They do not need to be academic writing in the sense that we've been defining today. It's not like writing a publishable paper or a formal statement. It can be very personal. It can be, well, from my experience, whatever, and then go on that way. Other people might want to write an argument of some kind to present to the professor, but it is it's not meant to be an instance, or not required to be an instance of academic writing. Does that answer the question? Someone want to carry this further?
Yes, I just have one more. What happens then if I cannot meet the deadline of completing all the 6 responses in the due time?
I think Nemanja has probably already sent you or will send you very shortly the letter that I referred to, because I sent him a message after you sent me a message saying you hadn't received that letter. So you will, in that letter, we describe a new procedure, which is that those assessment papers will be immediately sent to our registrar after the deadline. Up to the deadline, Nemanja compiles them. And keeps track of them and submits them to professors. After that, just because he has so much to do, we are just going to use an administrative device and pass it to our registrar, who will then forward it to the professor and note that it is complete. This means that essentially there is no actual deadline any longer. But the real deadline is that you have to complete these seminars in order to get credit for the courses and these seminar assessments. And so it is conceivable. In fact, you can go into supervision without having completed all of the assessment papers. I don't recommend it, but you can do it. And I'm using, I've just been through this, it's strictly formal. What I'm saying is that you have completed the required work for the course to advance to supervision. You simply haven't completed all the work required for credit. And it's a pure technicality I'm using to get through a little hole in the Malta structure. So I'm trying to take the pressure off in this respect. The pressure off us, because students are constantly asking for extensions and and so forth, but also the pressure off you. So in the first month, I would recommend that you do it in the first month, because then we send it to the professor. It's still fresh, and they will do what they will with it. But if it's impossible for you, and I understand that. I mean, people have personal circumstances. People have different commitments to this assessment process. I think we have to honor that, and so we're trying to lighten this this stricture in the way I described.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. That was super inspiring, and as you said, kind of an amazing resource moving forward. My question is: Do people ever, when transitioning from an MA to a PhD, do people ever develop the same thesis that they did for their MA?
Okay, so this is David. Somehow you haven't come up on the screen for me, and I see your question from before. This is a I'm speaking academically now. This is a difficult question, actually. In the sciences, it's very common for the person to go back to the same question, or even the social sciences. In the humanities, it is less common, and that the humanities and some social sciences. What that means essentially is that the PhD thesis should not be, the PhD thesis should represent a new version of the project, or a renewed version of the project. And I put, I try to say that strongly. One cannot, the basic rule in the humanities and the social sciences here that's at work is you cannot present the same work twice. That's the way it is. That's the same rule that says you cannot get an MA over in such and such a university and then come over to our university and present the same work. That's not kosher. At each time there has to be new work. And I'm avoiding the word original because that's so charged, and Julia was appropriately attentive to that. The thing is, if you do serious work, it's going to be original. That is my view, and it's always a new departure to the extent that you conceive it and you undertake it, and with your particular backgrounds and interests. But the project should be a new project. Now, that does mean that you can take up past work and carry it forward. And you can say in this thesis, I have demonstrated this. I now want to go forward with this and use the past work. That's fine. So, you know, and I think it would be hypocritical to pretend that you should not do such a thing, because the fact is, most of us don't have so many questions. You know, we have, and I say that in a, you know, a laughing way, but, you know, Heidegger said this is the go-to example. He said, a real thinker has only one question. And he was quite serious about that. I keep wondering what that one question was. My many years of reading him, I think maybe I know now, but it has to do with being a human being. But I think there's something to that idea that, and that's why I say, follow something that grips you, that moves you, that impassions you. And if you do that, it's going to be tough to let it go. That thing is going to continue speaking to you. Now, some people may very, very likely will say, I'd like to do something different now. You know, I've done this. I want to move into a different area. Fine. But I do understand that in many cases, people will feel, no, I need to continue this in some way. It just has to be a renewal of the project is the best way I can phrase it at this moment.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And I guess just a quick follow-up question to that is, yeah. When sort of thinking about the question or the problematic to the MA, is it kind of done in the same way as to the PhD?
When you come to define the topic?
Yeah, define the topic in the question that you have, in terms of kind of, you know, if say for instance, I'm thinking about, you know, potentially doing an MA and you're coming to the question, and then you may want to develop that further in a PhD as a renewal. And obviously, are you doing, is it the same process of, say, a proposal for an MA as a proposal for a PhD?
No, I think this is a good question, which we didn't really get to address. And in some respects, it's not an easy question. And the reason I say that is that the MA thesis is a much smaller undertaking. And that means that the nature of the question and the nature of the development of the question will inevitably change with respect to what happens in the PhD. Not change, it'll diverge from what happens in the PhD. Also, when you are writing an MA thesis, you know, you're not as experienced yet in posing a problematic, in most cases. If you're doing MA, then PhD. In most cases, people will not be as experienced yet at the MA level. So we don't expect of the MA as developed a structure as we would expect in the PhD. So maybe I should be going to examples, and time is a little short, so my mind is kind of short-circuiting on examples. But let me, I was talking a little bit, I think when I was talking about Antigone, I may have mentioned the topic of catharsis. I got involved with Aristotle's Poetics many years ago, back in 1985. And I wrote, it was actually for a seminar presentation, but I really got into it. And I wrote an essay on the Poetics, which was trying to explain or give a theory for how he understands catharsis on the basis of a notion of rhythm. Now, that's a nice MA thesis, I would say, right? Now, PhD would be, how do we think about catharsis in Western literature, going from Aristotle through Nietzsche up into Theodor Reich or whatever. And in that thesis, you might very well want to refer to the work on Aristotle, on the Poetics, if you take my example here. Right? But that conception of the question, catharsis in the Western tradition, it's a very different task from honing in on a topic in a particular context. I just had this intuition about rhythm. I had read Ben Venist's great article about rhythm, and I applied it. And you know, I'm about to publish that actually again, but that's a fairly, I don't want to say narrow, but it's a contained question, right? I was talking about a particular text, and I brought some other texts involved, but I was talking about a particular text. The other project is, I mean, you've got psychoanalytic approaches, you've got philosophical approaches, you've got literary approaches, you've got you know, questions about the legacy of Greek literature. I mean, that's a question that's already taking you in all sorts of ways, and the real task is going to be to narrow this down and to give it a workable form. So I hope that answers your question in a way. It's a question of scale, but scaling in this case means a transformation in the project. And
Thank you very much.
but again, I want to, when I start speaking like this, and oh, someone's going to say, "Oh shit, this sounds really hard." All of this is going to come to you in the course of your studies. This is why I was trying to say, be confident. You know, when you do if you do MA, PhD, you're going to have the 24 seminars in which you have seen how people develop questions and think through problems. And you'll have learned, and this is what I said in the orientation session, we're trying to teach you ways of thinking cross-disciplinarily. How to pose questions. So it's not about, you know, learning how to be how to be like any particular professor or to identify with that school. No, it's what I hope happens in the course of these 24 experiences is sometimes a jarring but very diverse set of experiences, which then free you to go along your own path. And to use what you've learned about questioning to construct your problematic. And I really am, I think it's not, when it comes to the PhD, it's not that big a deal, right? It's just a new stage that you will be coming to. And what we've tried to do today is give you ways of thinking about this. And I think, as I said with Julia, as I was listening to her, I was thinking, wow, this is going to be really helpful for some people later on. And when they get started, and so we're talking about all at once here in these 2 hours. We're talking about many different stages of the process and many different facets. Julia, I have been taking over in the questions and answers part because
no, but I've been talking way too long, so it's
I just wondered if you wanted to add anything to anything I've said in this. Any other questions? I don't mind staying on, but I also understand some people may have made appointments with themselves or with others. So please go ahead, but I don't mind staying on to answer a few more questions.
Question from Joaquin.
Yeah.
Hi, Dean Fentz. I have a question regarding contacting faculty. Yeah. And it's my understanding that we're not supposed to contact faculty, and I understand maybe the reasoning behind that as far as asking them just endless questions during the seminar. But if we, as you say, or as you've described to it, start to gravitate towards somebody before we've completed our 2 years, is it okay for us to send an email to them just to find out about their absolute current research and whether or not there might be some opportunities for collaboration?
You know what? I think the best way to do this is for me to serve as a conduit, or Nemanja can do the same thing. And that is to say, send us the message and we will forward it. Some of our faculty are not comfortable giving out personal emails. Some don't care, right? But there are people, you know, Slavoj, for example, is someone who really needs help filtering the volume of what's coming in, because he gets, and I mean, I get a lot of stuff for Slavoj, and I have to do some filtering for him, just because of his connection with EGS. And some of that stuff is a little crazy, be honest, Joaquin. There really does have to be a filter. And most of our students are, almost all of our students are fine, but we need to keep that formal structure in place, I believe, for this. I will never hesitate to forward things, but I think that I need to respect their, at least in some of their cases, their desire not to have an open line. Now, one thing we could do is try to work out with, because I think that we've entered a new phase right now with this online structure. Normally when we're meeting in Switzerland or in Valletta, the people are meeting with the professors and they just, they get to ask these questions. They even ask, can I use your email, whatever. All this is done with a great deal more fluidity and comfort. And, that's part of the normal that we're all yearning for. But one of the ways that we might deal with this is to have students use the EGS email addresses, because the professors have those too. The difficulty is trying to get them to use the EGS address. and I'm worried about your messages going into a dead letterbox. If I forward the message, then we know it'll get there. If we trust the professors to start using another email address, I'm not sure. So if anything I say there makes you still uncomfortable, let me know. We'll try to figure this out. But I think that the procedure I'm describing is probably the best one for the time being.
Okay, thanks.
There's a question from Victoria.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Julia and Nemanja, especially being 6 hours ahead of New York, where I am. I'm sure you're very tired. And
that's right. What time is it?
It's almost 6 o'clock. It's almost midnight there. And Chris, this is so helpful, and it's actually very inspiring. Well, and I don't feel there's anything that's like, even though I've not yet begun or proposed or formulated, it's so helpful for me to have such a great sense of the structure moving forward. It makes it, makes me kind of be able to take a breath and feel more comfortable going.
Let's hope everybody feels that way tomorrow too.
But I have a question for you, Chris, something you had brought up at the very beginning. Maybe somebody had asked a question related. This kind of segue from an MA to a PhD, and I didn't quite grasp what it really meant or what would be involved or not involved with if going straight from an MA into a PhD. I think you had said something that there would be a thesis, but not a need for supervision if you sort of go right away into the PhD. Could you elaborate on that?
My point is that we don't require a year of supervision at the MA level. So it's possible to turn in your MA thesis in your second year and then go on to enter the PhD program. The only requirement is that before you take courses at the PhD level, you have to turn in the thesis.
That makes sense. That's clear for me now. It makes sense. Thanks.
It's also a little bit a matter of choice, in the sense that someone who says, well, I would like supervision in the third year for my MA, then they will get a full supervision. Otherwise, they don't. We can consult with them about what they're doing and tell them, yeah, this sounds good. This sounds like you're approaching in a good way. You might want to read this or that. We can be in consultation, but it wouldn't be the same thing as a supervision. So it's your choice in that matter.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much.
Okay. Any other questions? Maybe we should let Nemanja go to bed. I think I just wanted to say that I've been I've really enjoyed the way the session is going so far, and thanks to everyone for their participation. I've dipped in, as those of you've noticed, in different seminars and participated as much as I could. I've really enjoyed it, and we have a couple more to go, so we should let everyone get rest. And let me also remind you that we have the other workshop coming up by Lars Eyer. Nemanja, what is the date again? Is that 21st?
Date is October 21st, and Lars will do his workshop in 2 parts. So first part will be from 5 to 7 Paris time. After that will be an hour break, and then second part will be from 8 to 10 Paris time, Central European time.
Okay. Let me just say a word about this. Lars is, Nemanja and Nemanja has the greatest credit here. I've worked very hard to get Lars to join us on this occasion. He is a little bit of a shadowy figure who's done some really fine work. And when we first tried, when we were in Aberdeen, he was reticent. He preferred to stay on his own. And so we're really pleased that he's joining us. He's a very interesting man and a thinker and writer. So this should be a very interesting workshop. So, okay, with that then, let me thank Julia again for this tremendous contribution. We'll get this into some recorded form for you. And then it will be available in the future, along with her slides, I think, and perhaps a small bibliography. In proper style. Good. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.